Hey guys, Toby Mathis here, and today we're going to be talking about legacy planning. It's one of my favorite topics because it's so misunderstood and so many people don't realize how easy it is to create something that lasts generations and how easy it is for you to start doing it. So let's dive into this, and I'm going to break it into 4 pieces, really easy. So I'm just going to put legacy and say, what does a legacy mean to you? A lot of people, when they hear legacy or dynasties or estate planning or any of this, immediately go to their demise and they start thinking about their death, and then it makes them not want to do it. So our first step with legacy planning is to recognize that it's not those things. What it is it's about creating a vehicle for your values to be passed on to future generations, things that you think are important, and making sure that they survive even after you have passed. And that's what your legacy is. It's what you're going to be known for. And so step number 1 is don't put it off. That's number 1. Don't put it off. Start thinking about it now. And the reason people put it off is because, frankly, sometimes you're talking about an uncomfortable subject. You're talking about, well, what happens if something happens to me? You should be having that conversation because it's a lot more than just if I pass. Who can make decisions for me if I'm incapacitated? I get in a car accident. I get sick. I end up in the hospital. Who can help me? Who can make, legally, who can make those decisions? If you're in a meretricious relationship, you have a fiance or whatnot. These are the things that you actually want to have in place so that you don't end up in a situation where somebody's being, hey, you can't come in, you can't meet with this person because you're not family. You want to have those things documented. And the only way you handle these is by hitting them head on. They're not difficult, they're not expensive, they're fairly quick to put in place, and you can make sure that's done so that somebody is caring for you. So even though it's uncomfortable, I would hit it straight on. Number 2 is fear. Is you think, hey, I got to have so much money. Maybe I don't have enough money. You're concerned that financially, geez, this isn't appropriate for me. This is only for rich people. Get that? That's a bunch of hooey. I use this example sometimes, and I think it'll resonate with a lot of you guys. If you called up somebody to your apartment or to your home, and you said, wherever you reside, and you said, I want an alarm system to protect my property and protect me when I'm in it. Could you imagine if the alarm company came in and looked around your place, looked at you and said, yeah, it's not worth it? They would never do that. But for some reason, you could walk into an estate planning attorney and they might say, well, estate planning is really for the wealthy. You need to have $1 million. Well, here's an easy thing. We all have bodies, right? We all have this, Insure it. It's not that difficult. Get a term policy or whatever so that you can create your legacy. And I'll give you an example of a legacy that I like to use. I had clients that love to do mission work around the world, and they wanted to make sure that their family members and their descendants were able to continue doing that type of work. In fact, they just wanted them to travel. They said, let's remove the mission work out of it, but I want you to see other cultures. I want you to be able to travel outside the United States at least one time a year on us in their future generations. And the way they did it is they put it in, it was real simple, it was a living trust, where the trust provided accommodations and travel expense for their descendants going on in perpetuity, and they funded it, not just, they weren't super wealthy, but they made sure that they had good life insurance so that if something happened to them, it funded their legacy, right? You don't have to have a ton of money to create a legacy. Maybe it's education. Hey, I want to make sure that my kids get to go to college. Maybe you get insurance for that, put it in there. It says, hey, this money is to be used primarily till they go to college, and then maybe at ages they get distributions. Or you say, hey, maybe it's need-based, but it's not just, hey, if something happens to me, here's a bunch of cash that they could squander. You've probably all heard the stories and you've read the stats. Money does not last when you just hand it to people. I think it's 16 cents on the dollar will make it after a period of years. And most of the time, it's not going to make it another generation. So if you want to create a legacy, you're going to have to protect some of that. You're going to have to designate it and say, this is what I want it to be used for. That's your legacy. And so we're creating this, hey, I think these things are important and I want to pass that down to future generations. Really simple to create. And let's jump into that next. Where do we start? So it's actually where do we start on this? And it's really simple. You got to consider your the financial that you need, the emotional impact, because it's not always about money. Sometimes it's about, hey, this is what I created. I want it to continue in perpetuity. Maybe it's some rental properties or whatnot. And you're telling somebody, this is what I want that money to be used for. So sometimes you're using a living trust. That's the most common estate vehicle that we use. You've probably heard of a will. A will is a fancy way of saying going to court, having a judge decide who gets what, which is not what we want. If we're going to create a legacy, we got to make sure that that does not happen. So we're going to use a living trust. Sometimes we use foundations like 501c3s, where it might be, hey, my money goes into a foundation for these organizations that I care about. My family will continue to run it. They can pay themselves a reasonable salary for doing so. Maybe that's something that if it's a modest amount, there's not going to be that much money going to them, but they're able to give money out of your memorial foundation or out of your foundation for organizations that you care about. That's a tremendous legacy. Maybe it's your church, maybe it's animal rights, whatever, fill in the blank. Maybe it's a volleyball league, who knows? But that can be your legacy. I am creating something that's going to have an impact on future generations by letting them know what was valuable to me. And I just want you to stop for a second and think about this. If somebody in your family, maybe somebody has, but if not, imagine that a grandparent had set up a foundation that was for the benefit of their church or a couple organizations, maybe a library or whatnot. And then you started to participate that. You said, oh, I have to foster these monies. Hey, let me help make sure that the financial planning is done right. Maybe you have somebody managing the money. Maybe you're managing it yourself. And you're looking at it saying, hey, I have to distribute a percentage every year to these charities. Which charities do I want to have? That is going to give you an experience that you wouldn't have otherwise had. Imagine that. Or imagine that you were the beneficiary over a legacy that required multicultural travel. And every year you're like, whoa, this thing will pay for me to go to another country. Imagine what your life would look like and imagine the impact that would have. That's the impact your legacy will have on your future generations. And so sometimes it's nice to be able to sit there and just future trip a little bit of what it would look like. Hey, my kids' kids, my kids' kids' kids, like my great-great-grandkids, they're still getting the benefit of something that I put in place. And maybe it's not all financial. Maybe there's a component that it is enriching their life and maybe adding a different experience that they wouldn't otherwise be exposed to because you thought ahead, this is what I want to create. And it's not that difficult. These are not tens of thousands of dollars to set up. It's less than $10,000 to set up an entire structure like that. If you're crazy, and sometimes it's just a few $1,000s to set up a really great legacy that will go on and enrich multiple generations upon generations. That could be significant in how it impacts your family and the trajectory that it takes. The people that do this, the wealthy that do this, they reap rewards multiple generations on down. All right, number 3. We want to leave values. A lot of us think about stuff. We think about, I want to make sure that my kids get my plates or some artwork or some cash. Just saying, a lot of times an inheritance can actually harm somebody if they don't know how to handle it. Maybe they're going through drugs or alcohol, or they're going through a bad patch in their life, or they're too young to understand what that money is in it. Maybe they were in college and they decide to drop out because they got a nice $100,000 inheritance or something like that, right? They go, oh, I can leave. I know you're all laughing, saying $100,000 won't do it. I've seen it. Right? It could be, maybe it's $1 million, maybe it's $2 million, and then the next thing you know, they're 40 years old and don't have a career because they've been living off of what you left them. It could actually do harm. So what I'm going to encourage you to do with your legacy is leave values. That's where you're starting to think, what are the things that I want to pass on? Maybe it's giving. Maybe it's, again, multicultural. Maybe it's a love for a sport or a love for an activity or a love for a hobby or a love for pets, a love for animals, whatever it is. You fill in the blank. You start thinking about your values. That's what your legacy should be. That is what resonates for a long period of time. I've been doing this now over 25 years, seen a ton of scenarios come through the door, and I'm telling you, the ones where you're actually telling a story and you're saying, this is what was important to me, and I've seen 3 generations now have been impacted by this, and I've seen those, and it's always the story that wins. It's grandpa and grandma This is something that they were really thought was very important, and it was a value that they held, and we're continuing to foster that. And they feel an attachment to that relative, an emotional attachment, and it's also, when they tell the story, it's with pride. My great-grandfather set this up, and this is what they were doing, and I'm continuing to do that, and my kids will continue to do that. I'm telling them the same story, and I'm passing it down. In order to make it work, though, when you leave values, you have to create a structure. You have to give it a body, and that's going to be, I said, living trust. It's foundation. Sometimes you're using LLCs, like if you have real estate and you think it's really important to have income-producing assets, you could you set up the LLC structure, and you're passing that on. The LLC structure never dies. So all you're doing is giving somebody else that's in charge of it. And that's an easy way to create multi-generational wealth, is to not sell those assets off when you pass away. And it ends up being a very effective tool. And you could very easily insure yourself so that there's additional funds, and you can encourage your kids to do it. If they see you do it, they might do it. And here's an easy one. Hey, I'm creating this legacy. I want to have these assets for people who want to go to school, medical issues. Maybe it's to make sure that nobody in our family is ever indigent or living in poverty. That'll help them. Is basically, you call it need-based. We call it HEM standards in this world, which is health, education, maintenance, and support. You put that in there, and you're encouraging your kids, hey, when you pass, buy life insurance, maybe even early on, and make it a beneficiary so that it continues to build assets into it. It's going to continue to grow and compound and benefit future generations. And maybe they're leaving their estate to the same thing. And you're basically teaching them, here's the vehicle that we created. You can continue to foster it, and then tell your kids to do the same. Maybe when they're really young, buy life insurance policies on all of them, say, here's the beneficiary, this is why we're doing it, and encourage them to continue to keep that in place. And then the last thing I'm going to say, number 4, is to avoid disputes. And it sounds like, hey, that's easier said than done. No. If you put together a structure, and that structure has teeth in it, so if somebody fights, if somebody contests it, if somebody tries to take it to court or tries to undo that legacy that you've created, that it disinherits them, or that there's actual ramifications so that you could avoid the dispute. A lot of people, again, when they hear legacy planning, they think of wills. They think of Michael Jackson, right? He created this. Michael Jackson was interesting because he had a will that created a trust that holds the music rights and continues on. To this day, his estate continues to kick off hundreds of millions of dollars, right? But realistically, he put it right in the public eye, and there was immediately a big old fight in the courts over who was going to be the executor. I think there was multiple parties that were fighting over it, et cetera, because wills go straight into court. Living trusts do not, and you can keep it completely private. So if you want to know about like a living trust, Sinatra, even Kobe Bryant, you can take a look at those. Even when they had to go into court, you could not see what was in the trust. It was in camera, which means that only the judge saw it. And there was no disputes. There was just adding a child that was afterborn. Usually you're saying descendants, and you're using a term like that. In some cases, the attorneys draft the names, and then if you have another child, you have to go in and amend. Not my favorite. I tend to say descendants so that I don't have to do that. But they created a legacy that would avoid disputes because it's not going into a probate situation where people get to contest it and where all the heirs are fighting over control over the assets. The assets are already in a vehicle. That vehicle is operating and can have provisions that avoids the disputes. The other thing you could do is make sure that the monies are designated to a particular area. For example, if I make my beneficiary, or a chunk of it, a foundation, and I fund that during my lifetime, and I fund it with my estate after I pass, it's really, really tough for somebody to come in there and fight it, right? Number one, if you're using a living trust, they're not even in the equation. If they do, they're not a beneficiary. They'll get booted. And you could still put in there, even if they were a beneficiary, that they're going to lose their inheritance if they contest, which is a great way to keep people in line. What I've seen is that avoiding disputes just means stay out of the courts. You're not missing anything. You don't want to go in there and be Matlock or whatever these, Perry Mason or whatever. You want to avoid court if you can at all costs. Like there's nothing good that happens in court. It sucks your money, time, it's emotionally draining, and if we can avoid it, we should. And that's what good legacy planning is about. It's about setting something up where it's private. The disputes, if there are any, are handled privately, and there's ramifications if you run in and try to drag it into a court proceeding. These lawyers, I swear to God, sometimes they see kindling and they see gas and they want to throw a match at it, right? Sometimes there's disputes where they make it worse. You want to avoid that if you can, and the way you do that is by creating a legacy with a structure that addresses that ahead of time proactively. Just if you can, avoid court. You're not missing anything. You don't need to go in and probate every estate. Or if you are going to do you can actually do a probate where the living trust is the sole beneficiary, so that even if you want to close off creditors and you've heard that, hey, we want to make sure that we probate it, you could do it without a bunch of beneficiaries, without a bunch of people fighting over, again, the silverware and the plates in the house. We want to avoid that at all costs if we can, because it's so frustrating, emotionally draining, and costly to the estate and to the heirs. Like a lot of times they'll just drain the estate fighting over things. We want to avoid that by drafting the right structure, the right vehicles, living trusts, foundations, using the appropriate entities, and avoid it. So if you are interested in creating a legacy, what I'd like you to do is go down in the comments and first off, write what's important to you and what type of legacy you want to create. And then I'll put a link up above where you can get a free consult and talk to somebody about putting your legacy into form, or you could talk to somebody about what your options are. It's a no obligation consultation. It's free, and you could talk to somebody who does this day in and day out, so you can determine whether or not this is something you want to pursue right now. Whether you want to do this, don't put it off, and start with a very simple vehicle like a living trust. You could just reach on out and use that consult link for an absolutely free consultation to talk to somebody about what it might look like. Hey, if you can, like and subscribe. It really helps our channel out. And if you know anybody that would benefit from this information, please share it. Good luck.